Good afternoon. It's November 15th, 2020. This is Dan Arma for Logical Alchemist. I've got a few things on my mind. Primarily, I'm thinking about cultural orthodoxy. The intense, overwhelming force all around us that is pushing one frame of thought. It's pushing an unquestionable narrative that the steadfast, unrelenting march to the left toward progressivism is the way. Anything else, any deviation from that, is blasphemy, punishable by being canceled, being ostracized, or even threat of violence, as we saw yesterday at the Trump rally in D.C. Now, if you haven't heard, there were thousands of folks who marched yesterday in support of President Trump. And, of course, the Antifa counter-protesters arrived and caused trouble. This included punching a woman in the back of the head, a sucker punch. This included knocking down an older man who was in a scooter and pouring water over him. This included going to diners, eating outside, trashing the place, and setting off a firework mortar right next to them to get them to leave because they were wearing Trump attire. This is where this kind of thinking gets us. To me, this is already extreme. And yet, I see this as potentially getting worse. This situation that we find ourselves in, where violence and harassment and just overall indecency and inhumanity, didn't get here by chance, and it didn't happen overnight. The slow march toward the left has gone almost unnoticed by the mainstream folks. For anyone who has been really paying close attention to what's been happening, none of this is really a surprise. People were calling this kind of behavior out for years. But now, this year, obviously, we've seen it ratcheted up to an insane degree. This year, we've seen the opinion editor from the New York Times, James Bennett, resign because of backlash from his own colleagues, because he committed the apparently unforgivable sin of allowing a Republican senator to express his opinion. And that was Tom Cotton, who argued back in June that it's time to bring in the military or activate the Insurrection Act to quell the rioters. His doing this put him in the line of fire such that he had to leave. He had to resign. And I'm not surprised, and yet it's baffling and sad to see that the New York Times, the international paper of record, the gray lady, falls so far from its once rigorous standards, its integrity, its reputation, to me is shattered. It's gone. And this was back in June, and we've seen the riots escalate to a point now where I think it's fair to say that we have domestic terrorists. Think about what terrorism is. It's using violence, intimidation, harassment, assault toward political ends. That is what Antifa and BLM are today. And because the mainstream liberal left has not denounced this, has not criticized it, they continue to operate with little to no repercussion. This is the situation that we've created for ourselves by allowing the culture to move continuously left with no forethought, with no question of, is this the right thing to do? I don't think it is. This is only going to get worse. More recently, we've seen, of course, the New York Post become censored for breaking the Hunter Biden scandal story. They were locked down on Twitter for 2 weeks. And initially, when you tried to share the story in a tweet, it wouldn't go through. Twitter didn't allow this to be published because of its supposed hacked materials policy, which obviously only applies when it makes the left look bad. It doesn't matter if you have anonymous sources or hacked records about Trump's tax returns. Nobody bats an eye for that. But when it might make the left's candidate a few weeks before the election look bad, then you need Twitter to actively intervene. Unbelievable. And also, shortly after, you had Glenn Greenwald resign from The Intercept, the news outlet that he helped to found. The members of their editorial board told Glenn, you can't publish your piece, not in The Intercept, and not anywhere else, which was in clear violation of his contract, at least as he argues, right? These events are indicators of a trend. The backward slide into not just the left, but the slide clearly toward decay, cultural, intellectual decay. This can only spell bad things for our world, for the Western world, and for the globe at large. Because we are the ones upholding some semblance of freedom of speech, freedom of thought in the world. And if it declines here, it will decline everywhere else eventually. This situation obviously is disheartening for me, but I believe that with the advent of things like Parler, which was the #1 downloaded app last week, BitChute for video, and just the emergence and flourishing of alternative voices, alternative tech, this could be the antidote. This work here, this challenging of cultural dominance of cookie cutter people, cookie cutter thoughts. This is something to eradicate, not by force, not by violence, not by harassment, which are the tools that the left uses today. No, we don't need to stoop to that level. Because for one, it doesn't work. And number two, it just violates human decency. It violates not only the written rules of engagement in speech, but the unwritten rules of integrity when it comes to civic and human discourse. I believe history will be on the side of those in the latter camp. I think our civilization depends on it. I think anyone who prioritizes liberty over a nerfed, bubble-wrapped world of theoretical safety, if you value liberty more than safety, I think history will be on our side. But right now, the cultural war, the info war, whatever you want to call it, is obviously in full swing. And the most powerful tool I believe that we have is our voice. Our ability to say no. No, I don't agree with this. This is what we're going to do instead. If there's any real resistance today, not the resistance movement against Trump that the Democrats so idealistically think they are leading the charge of. There is a real resistance today. And it comes from a myriad of people who are challenging the norm, challenging mainstream thought. I encourage you to seek them out, listen to them, subscribe to them, give them platforms, and throw in your voice too. Comment, tell a friend, start the conversation. Do so intelligently, obviously. Don't put yourself in the line of fire if you don't need to. And if you do, know what you risk. You risk your livelihood. You risk others around you disconnecting from you. You almost risk everything. But that may just be the necessary sacrifice that we find ourselves in. The situation is dire, and it's declining rapidly. But where there is decay, there is also opportunity for rebirth.